So I'm going to talk about a project that I've been doing with colleagues from the University of Iowa for about 2.5 years. It's a collaboration where we've been working with GoDaddy to use their data on domain name websites. And while this research preceded COVID-19, there's actually a working paper on this that's already posted on the center website. The working paper came out a few weeks ago. We're continuing this research, and so thinking a lot about what role that it's going to play in the economic recovery and what this tells us about what's happening with the economy in communities across the country now. So what I want to do, I'm actually going to spend a little time talking about what this data is and why we were interested in it, what motivated us to work on this. I'll do a really quick tour of some of the results we've seen, because you can look in the paper for that. And then I want to talk about what we see as questions that can be addressed going forward. So Carolyn from Iowa and I have worked for years on looking at how the internet matters for individuals. And there's a lot of data, individual level data, and there are whole bodies of research on how this matters for economic opportunity, for political participation, for democratic participation, digital government, access to government services. We've done some of this research, but there are larger bodies of research. What we don't have very good data on is how this matters for communities. So it's clear, and it's becoming so clear in this recent pandemic, that really today internet use in general for individuals matters for the ability to participate in society more generally. And public policy assumes that it's important not just for individual opportunity, but for communities too, that it has these spillover benefits for communities. But we don't have really good measures of broadband use or internet use in communities to show how this matters. So usually things like IT employment get measured, but that's just one sector, and the effects of broadband you would expect would be broader. We measure infrastructure, but not everybody, as we see now, can afford to have it or is able to use the technology. We do have data on broadband subscriptions by place, which suggests something about use, but not a lot about how people actually use the technology and how that's connected to benefits for communities. And how economic opportunity, which is what we focus on here, varies across communities, matters a lot for individuals and their outcomes too. It matters a lot for public policy. As Raj Chetty's work with his colleagues has shown, place affects things like intergenerational mobility and lifelong earning. The US really is not one economy, but a whole collection of regional economies with a lot of variation. And what we've seen since World War II is at first, in the decades after World War II, gaps between communities narrowed. Since the 80s, they've actually widened. There's more inequality across places. Moretti, Florida, this think tank called the Economic Innovation Group have all written a lot about this, but economists agree that there's been this structural change that accounts for this growing inequality across communities, and that came before the last Great Recession, but accelerated with that. And one of the questions is, what does this mean going forward now after this recession from the pandemic? Technology plays a role in this. It's increased the premium for education and skill. It's concentrated technology firms in what Moretti has called these ecosystems of innovation or brain hubs. It's really concentrated economic activity investment in some cities, often called superstar cities, Silicon Valley on the coasts, more than the manufacturing economy had. So in part, technology is helping to drive, ironically, this inequality, even though, it's supposed to be the death of distance. But we want to ask, have we been ignoring some aspects of the digital economy, like this technology use in communities, that haven't received attention, but yet actually have an impact that might not have been measured? Can technology in different ways support more inclusive growth and economic activity? And that's what we started out asking for this project. But currently with the pandemic, we're going to be able to look at how technology is affecting local communities during and after the pandemic, and what effect it might have on recovery and on future trends. So I want to say a little bit about what this data is. GoDaddy is the largest registrar in the world of domain name websites. That's how you register your website. There are 20 million US ventures, I'll explain that in a minute, or domain name websites in the US that are actively being used, and that's our database. It's de-identified data and geocoded that they've given to us. Their data scientists have clustered these in 4 levels of activity. I'll talk about the different levels of activity in a minute. What we've used throughout this research, though, is the number of ventures per 100 population for counties or zip codes or metros or micro areas. That's the density of ventures. And our data begins in May 2018. The white working paper we're posting goes through May 2019, but we're getting monthly data, and we're going to be able to continue this research. If people are interested, I'll post this under the working papers later. There's a website where GoDaddy makes some of the data available for download, and there are interactive maps in our working paper. So this is mapped by county across the US, what the density of domain name websites looks like. And as I said, there are 20 million ventures. So a venture is one of these domain name websites that represents a business, a nonprofit. It can be an organization, a little league or whatever, an idea that somebody gets a domain name website for. And this includes the services that go along with it. Those are some of the things we measure in the different levels of activity. So we look at demand, how busy the venture is, how connected or networked it is, how broad it is, how many services has, how much it's built out. And using those measures, we've clustered this. You can see that over a third of websites are fairly low activity. Only about 8%, this has varied a little over time, but this was the initial data, only about 8% have high level activity. When we talk about very active ventures, they're the top 2 here, levels 3 and 4. So we know that 3/4 of them are commercial, are business. There was some machine learning done, but we also came up with this, basically the same answer, doing a random sample survey of venture owners. About a little over 30% are solo entrepreneurs. Most are very small businesses with less than 10 employees, if any. About 19% do business online only. Over half have some kind of income coming from the venture. For some people, that's just supplemental. And about 20% are not full-time business owners or full-time workers, but unemployed, retired, disabled, students, part-time workers, and so forth. So what we get from these ventures, while this includes multinational businesses, as well as micro businesses. Because we're counting numbers and density rather than income, this emphasizes small and micro entrepreneurs. And we found in comparing this data to the small business data that we're picking up businesses that are informal, very small. They don't show up in the government data because they're too small or too informal. And you can see the red is where there are more small businesses in the country, and the blue is where there are more ventures than small businesses. Okay. Really quickly, we asked 3 questions about outcomes for economic prosperity, median income, and recovery from the recession. Because you can read this and see the models, I'll just be quick. We use a prosperity index from a group called the Economic Innovation Group. We actually flipped their distressed communities index, but it includes outcomes for residents, for individuals, as well as for businesses. Percent employment, educational attainment, poverty rate, median household income, not just business outcomes. And doing multivariate regression, controlling for socioeconomic factors, educational attainment, different economic sectors in the local economy, etc., and controlling for broadband subscriptions too. We see that both ventures and highly active ventures have a statistically significant effect on this index, on the score on this prosperity index. And broadband matters too, but independently, these ventures also matter. And we've replicated these findings using some data that just came out from the 2018 American Community Survey, and those findings hold. We've looked at this, we've done 2-stage regression models, stripping out broadband subscriptions, median household income, and small business density, using those in the first stage. And the results are even stronger. So trying to get at at causation the best that we can, some of the probability estimates. We've done interactions with broadband, and we're somewhat surprised that actually in communities with relatively low broadband, more rural, more poor, ventures matter more. That's this blue line at the bottom. We've looked at changes in median income, again, trying to get at change and not just a single point in time, and ventures controlling for other factors. This 1-year change from 2016 to 2017 for each highly active venture, median household income increases by $331. If we do that for 2 years using the 2018 data, it's $408, controlling for other factors. The Economic Innovation Group looks at recovery from the last recession. And 2007 to 2016, and we see that ventures are statistically significant in positively related to recovery from the last recession. So that raises the question, how does this matter for recovery? My husband's phone's going off. I will ignore that, however. How does this matter for recovery from COVID-19? With so much going online, you could imagine that this matters even more. Communities with a high density of ventures may be able to weather this better, with businesses that are doing online transactions and able to continue more, marketing afterward. Micro businesses may be able to start up without physical spaces and that expense or capital afterward. Perhaps they're more nimble. It also may be that these small firms and micro businesses, we may find out, have just suffered disproportionately. We don't know, but these are questions that we're going to be asking as we look at the data. We have time series data already and monthly now. We'll be able to see this almost in real time, not only for density of websites, but we've asked for levels of activity, traffic, and so forth. Because this might be earlier indicators of changes in communities and more sensitive than, you know, births and deaths of websites. We want to ask questions like, what effects do we see during and after the shutdown in terms of traffic and changes in ventures, activity? How does recovery from the last recession, we have data on that, how does that affect resilience now? How does this differ in metropolitan versus micropolitan areas? Brookings has suggested that micropolitan areas will do worse. We don't know, it's an empirical question. We have this data on this level. You know, how does this differ across sectors? How do ventures matter when you control for differences in state policies, not only restrictions, but whether or not they had programs to assist businesses, small businesses? Does the pandemic accelerate this trend toward growing inequality? And you know, what, if any, role do ventures have in this? But we think that we'll be able to see a lot about economic trends in communities using this data. So just to sum up, current government data really fails to fully capture how, you know, the economy has evolved, including these micro businesses and fledgling startups that we feel we're capturing in this data. So ventures are a new measure of online participation in communities, you know, in addition to broadband subscriptions or some of the small business measures. We've seen in the past that they're significant predictors of community prosperity. And so tracing digital activity at the grassroots during and after the pandemic, we hope to be able to see how communities vary in terms of resilience, and in urban and rural communities and tech hubs and manufacturing towns on the coasts and in the heartlands. So